This is where we begin. The dark night of June 12, 1982. Geri McGee's sudden disappearance plunges us into the underbelly of the Las Vegas Mafia. We set the stage with a cold, cinematic hook that establishes her role in the organized crime world and why she had to disappear. The tension builds quickly, as it's clear that she knew something that had to be kept hidden. The truth behind the Mafia's grip on the casino empire. Geri McGee didn't arrive in Las Vegas as a goddess of fortune. She came from humble beginnings, a small-town girl from the Midwest, seeking something more. Born in 1957, she was raised in a modest household where life was a constant battle for survival. The only luxury she knew was the fleeting promise of a better future, one that didn't involve the dead-end jobs that stifled her dreams. By the time she was in her 20s, Geri knew there was no place for her in the quiet, rural life she was born into. Las Vegas was her escape. It was a city that promised fame, wealth, and the allure of being seen. A world where a woman like her could rewrite her story. At first, she worked as a showgirl, but that wasn't enough. The bright lights of the casino floors and the shadowy corridors of power called to her. It wasn't long before she became entangled with the powerful men who ruled the strip. Her beauty and charm were undeniable, but it wasn't her looks that would make her invaluable. Geri had a sharp mind and an even sharper instinct. She understood people. She knew who to trust, who to manipulate, and most importantly, who to fear. She didn't just survive in Vegas. She thrived, quickly climbing the social ladder. She became a trusted confidant in the casino world, particularly with the men who ran them. She wasn't just a pretty face in the background. She was someone who knew the ins and outs of the operations. Someone whose loyalty could be bought for the right price. But loyalty in the world of organized crime isn't a simple matter. Geri knew she was a pawn in their game, but she also knew she had power of her own. She had information, and information, in a world as corrupt and dangerous as Las Vegas, was worth more than gold. She wasn't just a trophy girlfriend for a mafia boss. She was their silent partner. But every rise in the underworld comes with a cost. Geri knew that she was living on borrowed time. In the Mafia, loyalty is fleeting. Trust is as thin as the paper it's written on. It wasn't long before Geri found herself standing at a dangerous crossroads, one that would determine whether she remained on top or became another forgotten casualty of the game. Geri McGee didn't just survive the Mafia world. She carved her name into it. Her rise wasn't a sudden surge. It was a calculated climb, step by step, navigating through layers of danger and deception. Early on, she understood that Vegas wasn't a place for half measures. It was a city where you either played the game at the highest level or got swallowed by it. Her introduction to the Mafia came through her relationship with the powerful casino boss, who was well connected with the city's criminal overlords. The connection seemed like nothing more than a glamorous affair at first. But Geri wasn't content being a mere accessory. She began to understand the business side of the casino empire, the shadowy figures who pulled the strings behind the glitzy facade, and the corrupt deals that funded the high-rolling lifestyle everyone admired. Geri wasn't naive. She saw through the layers of charm and opulence to the rot beneath. The Mafia controlled every aspect of the casino business, the money laundering, the fixed games, the silent partnership with city officials, and the brutal enforcers who ensured everything ran smoothly. Geri had a front-row seat to this world, and she knew too much. She began to understand the real power structure of Las Vegas. It wasn't just about the casinos or the glitzy shows. It was about control of people, money, and the very streets that ran through the city. Her beauty helped her gain access, but it was her intelligence and ability to play the game that made her indispensable. Soon, she wasn't just the girlfriend of a powerful man. She became a key figure in the operations of one of the most influential mafia families in Vegas. She knew how to play the role of the loyal confidant, feeding information to the right people at the right time. She earned the trust of the most dangerous figures in the city, becoming their eyes and ears inside the casino. But as Geri moved up in the ranks, the risks grew exponentially. The Mafia didn't take kindly to women in positions of power, especially ones who knew as much as she did. The men around her, once supportive, now saw her as a threat. They respected her, but they feared what she knew and what she could do with that knowledge. Despite the danger, Ginger's world became a delicate balancing act. She played the role of the Mafia's trusted woman, while secretly pulling strings of her own. She was a master at manipulating situations to her advantage, feeding information to whoever could keep her in power. It wasn't just the casino operations she controlled. She had a hand in everything, from the rigged games to the political bribes that kept the Mafia's iron grip on the city strong. Her rise wasn't a path of glory. It was fraught with betrayals, lies, and constant threats. But for Ginger, it was the price of power. She knew that in the world of organized crime, you either played dirty or got played. And for a woman like Ginger McKenna, it wasn't just about survival. It was about becoming untouchable. But in the end, untouchability was a myth. And in the Mafia, even the most powerful players are eventually brought to their knees. The turning point came quietly, like a slow unraveling of a tightly woven thread. Ginger McKenna, the trusted confidant, had always known there were limits, unwritten rules within the Mafia that she could never cross. But as her power and influence grew, so did her curiosity. She began to dig deeper into the world around her, questioning the foundations of the empire she helped build. It wasn't just the everyday dealings of the casino world that caught her attention. It was something darker, something more dangerous that the men around her had kept hidden for years. The Mafia wasn't just making money through their casinos. They were using them to launder massive amounts of illicit wealth, not just from Vegas, but from all corners of the globe. The international scale of the operation stunned her. It wasn't just money that flowed through the casinos, it was arms deals, drug shipments, and ties to corrupt governments. Ginger had uncovered the very heart of the Mafia's power, the secret dealings that kept their empire running. At first, Ginger wasn't sure what to do with the information. The consequences of exposing it were too severe to even consider. But the more she learned, the more she understood that her very survival depended on her ability to navigate this dangerous web. She realized that the power she had, the trust she had earned, wasn't enough to protect her. If she was exposed, if anyone found out how deep her knowledge went, she'd be marked for death. Ginger had always believed that loyalty was her shield. But loyalty in the Mafia world is as fleeting as the next power struggle. She had come to realize that the men around her, the ones she trusted the most, would not hesitate to silence her if they believed she had become a liability. And now, she had learned too much. Ginger's silence had always been valuable to the Mafia, but now, her silence was the only thing keeping her alive. The tipping point came when she overheard a conversation, one she wasn't supposed to hear. One of the Mafia's most powerful figures, a man who had been her lover and confidant, made a passing comment that changed everything. "If she knows too much, we can't let her walk away." The statement was casual, almost offhand, but it sent a shiver down her spine. The weight of the words hit her all at once. She had become expendable. Her mind raced. There was no more playing it safe. No more relying on the false sense of loyalty she'd once thought was her protection. Ginger had to make a choice. She could either walk away and risk exposing everything, or she could play the game one final time, outsmarting those who once held the cards. But in the Mafia, there are no exits. Once you're in, there's only one way out: death. Ginger knew she had one chance to escape, but even as she plotted her next move, she understood that the price of survival was far higher than she could ever imagine. The Mafia was watching. They always were. The stakes of Ginger McKenna's world were far greater than what anyone could see from the polished surfaces of the casino floors. Beneath the veneer of luxury and glamour lay a network of power, politics, and violence that stretched far beyond the borders of Nevada. Ginger's discovery had shattered the illusion. The Mafia was not just an organized criminal group. It was a political machine, deeply intertwined with the very institutions that controlled the fate of the city. Las Vegas wasn't just about the neon lights and the roll of dice. It was the beating heart of a larger scheme, one in which the Mafia's grip on the casinos allowed them to control much of the city's economy. But that wasn't all. The Mafia had carefully cultivated relationships with high-ranking city officials, law enforcement, and even judges. Their influence wasn't just criminal, it was institutional. It was the kind of power that could silence entire investigations, erase records, and manipulate elections. In the higher circles of power, where money flowed freely between the palms of politicians and businessmen, The Mafia had established itself as an indispensable ally. For the right price, they could sway any decision, protect any crime, and ensure that the rules of the game always favored them. The city officials were not just corrupt. They were puppets in the Mafia show. And Ginger, in her unrelenting pursuit of truth, had learned the very core of this power structure. But the more she uncovered, the more dangerous it became for her. The Mafia's network extended far beyond the local Mafia bosses and the casino owners she had once known. She had touched the web of corruption that linked Las Vegas with powerful players across the country. Businessmen, politicians, and even international figures. This wasn't just organized crime. This was a shadow government, one that had silently dictated the flow of money and power for decades. Her discovery came at a critical moment. As Ginger learned more about the Mafia's political connections, she also saw the cracks forming in the carefully constructed empire. The political landscape in Nevada was shifting. The rise of new politicians and law enforcement figures who wanted to take control of the state was creating tension. As the Mafia's influence in the political sphere began to face new challenges, those who had once been loyal to the mob were now being forced to pick sides. And then, Ginger's position became even more precarious. Her involvement in this world, her knowledge of the Mafia's political dealings, put her on a collision course with those who had the most to lose. The men who controlled Las Vegas, who had once seen her as a useful ally, now saw her as a liability. They couldn't afford for her to walk away with the secrets she had uncovered. Ginger's knowledge was now the most dangerous currency in town. But there was another dimension to the political escalation. It wasn't just about the Mafia's hold on the city. It was about their ability to manipulate the laws, the media, and the very narrative that shaped public perception. Ginger knew too much about how they controlled public opinion. She knew how the Mafia had shaped the very image of Las Vegas itself. She had become an unwitting part of the Mafia's propaganda machine. But now, the truth was slipping through the cracks, and that truth could destroy everything. The realization was chilling. Ginger McKenna wasn't just caught in the middle of a power struggle. She was a piece in the grand game of politics, one where the rules were made to keep the powerful in control, and those who didn't play by the rules were crushed out in the world of organized crime. Power is both invisible and omnipresent. The Mafia's influence didn't just control the streets of Las Vegas. It controlled the very fabric of the system itself. And for Ginger, the closer she got to the truth, the closer she came to the inevitable. The men who held power in this world would never let her escape. Ginger McKenna's rise to power within the Mafia's inner circle came with one undeniable truth. Loyalty in this world is conditional, fleeting, and brutal. The men who had once seen her as an asset, a trusted confidant, were now beginning to view her as a threat. The very qualities that had made her invaluable, her intelligence, her sharp instinct for survival, her ability to manipulate, were the same traits that made her dangerous to those who prefer the safety of their secrets. As the Mafia's political influence began to wane, so did Ginger's standing. The cracks in the empire weren't just visible to the outsiders anymore. They were tearing apart from the inside. Those in the highest positions of power had grown paranoid, driven by the fear that anyone could topple the carefully constructed house of cards they had built. They had no choice but to act quickly, ruthlessly, to protect what they had left. But it wasn't just the Mafia that was growing hostile. The political climate in Las Vegas had begun to shift. New faces were emerging, men who had long been kept in check by the Mafia's influence, now rising to challenge the status quo. They were more ambitious, more willing to break the unspoken agreements that had allowed the Mafia to thrive. Ginger's connection to the old power structure had made her both a target and a bargaining chip in the new world order. She had always been an insider, but now she found herself increasingly isolated. The phone calls stopped, the meetings grew fewer, and the familiar faces she had once trusted began to vanish. Those who had once confided in her, those who had shared their darkest secrets, were now avoiding her like the plague. The men she had worked alongside, those who had shared in her rise to power, had turned their backs. Ginger had crossed an invisible line, and in the Mafia world, that meant she was no longer untouchable. Her once loyal connections had become a silent circle of enemies. Some of them were already making deals with rival factions, trying to position themselves for what was coming next. Others were working behind the scenes to ensure that the Mafia's grip on Las Vegas remained intact, no matter the cost. But the most dangerous of all were the ones who stayed close, smiling, offering false reassurances while secretly plotting her downfall. Betrayal, in this world, is a currency just as valuable as money, and Ginger McKenna was rich with it. The men who had once protected her now saw her as a potential liability. She had outlived her usefulness. What was once a partnership was now a countdown to her demise. In her heart, Ginger knew what was coming. It wasn't just the whispers that made her nervous. It was the cold silence. In the Mafia, silence is a death sentence. The moment they stop speaking to you is the moment they've already written you off. She wasn't just being isolated. She was being erased. But even as the walls closed in around her, Ginger wasn't ready to give up. She had learned too much, seen too much, to simply bow out of the game. She had been a part of the Mafia for so long that it had become part of her identity. But now, her identity was a curse. Her very existence threatened the fragile equilibrium of the Mafia. And for the first time, Ginger wondered if she had played her final card. Ginger McKenna's fate was sealed long before she even realized it. The Mafia, always calculating, had no room for mercy when it came to those who became liabilities. Ginger's rise had been swift, but the fall was more abrupt than she could have ever prepared for. By the time the execution was set in motion, the writing was on the wall. Her name had been whispered in shadows, her moves tracked, her alliances tested. She had gone from being a trusted insider to a dangerous threat, a ticking time bomb. The Mafia couldn't afford to let her live, not with the secrets she held. Ginger knew she was being watched. The coldness in the air, the way people avoided eye contact, the sudden disappearances of those who once called her friend, all pointed to one inevitable conclusion. Her time was up. But even then, she refused to believe it. The same tenacity that had carried her through the Mafia's treacherous world made her think she could outsmart them one last time. She didn't believe they would kill her. After all, she was Ginger McKenna, a woman who had risen above them all. She believed she still held some leverage, that perhaps her value could be negotiated. The truth, however, was far simpler and far more brutal. She was expendable. The men who controlled the city no longer needed her. They knew what she knew, and they had outgrown her. She had outlived her usefulness. The execution was planned with chilling precision. It wasn't a public spectacle. It didn't involve a flashy confrontation or a shootout in a dark alley. Instead, it was a quiet, methodical erasure. Her body was found in a hotel room, a place she had frequented during her time in Vegas. The coldness of the room matching the indifference of her killers. There were no signs of struggle, no obvious injuries. It was almost as if she had been put to sleep, a final betrayal wrapped in silence. The Mafia's reach was long, but their execution was always impersonal. They didn't want Ginger to be remembered for her defiance. They wanted her to be forgotten. Her death wasn't the end of her story. It was just the closing of a chapter in a much larger narrative. The message was clear. No one, no matter how high they climb, is untouchable in the Mafia world. But Ginger's death sparked something unexpected. It wasn't the quiet end her killers had hoped for. There were whispers, rumors, and murmurs that rippled through the criminal world. The silence they sought to impose only gave birth to more questions. Who had ordered it? Why her? What had she uncovered that had made her so dangerous? Her death was the Mafia's attempt to snuff out the truth, but it only served to keep it alive in the hearts and minds of those who had known her. And for some, that truth would haunt them forever. Ginger McKenna's death sent shockwaves through Las Vegas, but not in the way the Mafia had hoped. The cold, calculated execution of a woman who had been at the heart of the criminal empire didn't bury the truth. Instead, it unearthed it. In the immediate aftermath, the Mafia moved swiftly to cover their tracks. The media was fed a story of a tragic drug overdose, the kind of narrative that could easily be swept under the rug. But the public was no fool. Too many people knew Ginger's connection to the city's most powerful figures, and too many had seen the way she had played the game. Her death wasn't just another casualty of the underworld. It was a murder with a message, one that the Mafia wasn't prepared to deliver publicly. Behind the scenes, however, the fallout was brutal. The Mafia's inner circle began to splinter. Members who had once been loyal to the organization were now questioning the price of loyalty itself. Rumors spread like wildfire, whispers of betrayal, of secrets hidden in the shadows, of a woman who had known too much for too long. And with Ginger's death, the floodgates had opened. Those who had been closest to her, the men who had used her, trusted her, even loved her, now found themselves under the microscope. Some tried to distance themselves from the chaos, disavowing any connection to the crime. Others were less fortunate. One by one, those who had been too close to Ginger's world began to fall. Allegiances were tested, and trust became a currency no one could afford. The political ramifications were equally disastrous. The Mafia's control over city officials was beginning to fray. The investigation into Ginger's death, though carefully managed, began to stir uncomfortable questions. A few brave souls, emboldened by Ginger's defiance, started to question the Mafia's untouchability. The city's fragile political landscape, once held together by a carefully crafted web of bribes and intimidation, began to shake under the weight of Ginger's revelations. The Mafia, however, was nothing if not resilient. They had weathered worse storms before, and they would weather this one too. But Ginger McKenna's death left a permanent scar. It was a reminder of the limits of power, that no one, not even the most powerful figures in the underworld, was truly in control. The truth about Ginger, her life, and her death would continue to haunt the Mafia. In the shadows of Vegas, where secrets fester and power corrupts, the echoes of her demise would not be easily forgotten. Ginger McKenna's story, tragic as it was, reveals something far deeper about the world she inhabited, and about the nature of power, loyalty, and survival. Her rise within the Mafia was a testament to the way the system works. Those who can navigate the underworld with cunning and ruthlessness will climb to the top. But her fall, her brutal and calculated execution, serves as a haunting reminder that no one, not even the most trusted insiders, is safe once they outlive their usefulness. The Mafia is not just a group of criminals running a city. It is a reflection of something larger, something universal. Power, once attained, is fragile, and those who wield it are often its first victims. The very structure that sustains the Mafia, secrecy, fear, loyalty, is also its greatest weakness. For as much as the Mafia tried to bury Ginger's truth, it only made it more dangerous. The more they sought to erase her, the more they ensured her legacy died at its core. Ginger McKenna's story is about the cost of knowledge. It's about what happens when someone learns too much about the inner workings of a world built on lies. And it's about the cruelty of those who will go to any lengths to preserve that world, even if it means silencing the ones who helped build it. But there is something more to be learned here. The Mafia's empire, like all empires, is built on the illusion of control. Power may seem absolute from the top, but the truth is, it's never guaranteed. The same paranoia that drives the Mafia to eliminate those like Ginger is what ultimately destroys them. Ginger's death was meant to erase her. Instead, it cemented her place in the story of Las Vegas, the Mafia, and the fragile nature of power itself. In the end, Ginger McKenna's story is not just a tale of betrayal and murder. It is a testament to the dark side of ambition, the cost of survival, and the inevitable fall of those who think they are untouchable. The Mafia might have erased her from their world, but her shadow will linger, reminding us all that in the underworld, nothing lasts forever.